Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the live stream today. Today in this video, we're going to talk about learning multiple languages at the same time, or learning at least two, learning more than one language. Which it needs to be said before I even start talking about learning two languages, we need to establish that learning one language is hard, right? I mean, here, at least here in the United States, I know in Canada, a lot of them, they start at a very early age learning French, and most of us don't succeed here in North America. You talk to so many people that took Spanish classes in high school, or I suppose French classes in Canada, and man, it's hard. You take 2, 3, 4 years of a language and you still can't speak it, right? So one language is hard. Trying to learn two languages at the same time, very difficult. This is a very difficult endeavor. So most of you know that I speak Spanish. I'm currently learning French, and more or less, I'm somewhat working on improving my Esperanto all at the same time, while trying to not lose my Spanish. So there are polyglots out there who speak many more languages than I do. So all I can do is talk from my own experience and listen to you guys, try to hear some of your experiences. Hello, Barbara Consuelo. Hi, thanks for joining. Lion RS 2014, what's up? Thanks for joining. So all I can do is just talk about my experiences of learning French and Esperanto while trying to maintain my Spanish. I also dabble occasionally. I like to go out and explore other languages. I spent a day learning German last year. I spent a week or two learning Portuguese before my trip to Portugal. Oui, je vais bien, merci. I maybe like 2 weeks or so I spent learning Portuguese before my trip to Portugal last year. Learned a very small amount of Dutch before going to Belgium and the Netherlands. So I like to check out other languages. I spent a small amount of time learning Tukipona. These are not languages that I was actually really dedicated to. Okay. Very interesting. I enjoyed the experience a lot, but I didn't set out to learn these languages, okay? The main languages that I've spent time in my life trying to learn are Spanish, French, Esperanto, and then to a more limited extent, Romanian and Greek. In the last two, I've essentially completely abandoned, at least for the time being. So what do? You want to learn a whole bunch of languages, but languages are hard. Most people don't even succeed in learning one language to a satisfactory degree. They take a lot of time. Learning a language can be like a full-time job if you want to actually make progress with it in any kind of timely manner. Right? If you can imagine taking 4 years of high school Spanish, that's a lot of time to dedicate to one language. And, everyone knows that you can't just take the classes in order to learn the language. You got to be doing stuff outside of class too. So on top of going to school and learning the language and dedicating time to it outside of school, and then trying to learn another language on top of that, and doing the same thing twice, spending twice the amount of time every day on learning languages, that's a big commitment, right? And you got to be committed if you're going to try to do that. Barbara says, I'm from Brazil and I'm learning English and Korean and want to learn Chinese, but I think better focus more on English. Yeah, well, that's the question, right? That's what we want to talk about. Everyone's different. Everyone has different priorities and what languages they want to learn, how quickly you want to learn languages, and how well you need to learn them, right? I put a lot of emphasis on learning Spanish because Spanish is one of the most important, probably the most important foreign language that you can know in the United States. Other countries, if you live in, I don't know, if you live in Ukraine, the Spanish might not be the most important language for you to know, but we have a lot of Spanish speakers here. So I put a lot of effort into learning Spanish. Okay. It's more important for me to speak Spanish well than to speak Romanian well, because I almost never run into native speakers of Romanian. Lion RS 2014 says, if you have Spanish at school for 4 years and you study at least 1 hour per day during that 4 years, you should be at a decent level. That depends though, right? Should be. Yeah, you're right. You should be at a decent level. If you spend 4 years practicing for 1 hour a day, you should be at a decent level. Depends on how you're going to be practicing, right? Because if you're practicing the wrong way, it's not going to stick in. It's tough. Learning languages is hard. And, on this channel, I talk a lot about trying to make your language learning fast, fun, and easy. But that's not to give you the impression that it is fast, fun, and easy. It is fun, but it's not fast and it's not easy. All we can do is try to make it expedite it a little bit and make it a little bit easier. Okay. But it's a commitment. All right. So don't be under any misconceptions that it's not hard and that it doesn't take a long time. So how did I go about learning multiple languages at once? Well, it also depends on what you mean by learning languages at once, because really, I didn't spend a whole lot of time learning multiple languages at once. I waited until I was at a pretty good level of Spanish. I was already fluent in Spanish. You could say I had already learned Spanish before I even started thinking about learning French. Okay. Now, of course, I'm always trying to improve both in Spanish and in English. I just learned a new word yesterday. What was it? Pseudepigraphon. Okay. Pseudepigraphon. Let me look this word up. Pseudepigraphon. Pseudoepigraphon. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. It's long. Okay, I just learned it yesterday, last night, for the first time. I've been an English speaker my whole life. Never heard it before. So I'm constantly trying to learn, even in English, but especially in Spanish, where I don't know anything close to all the words in Spanish. So all that to say, I reached a very good level in Spanish, still trying to push myself forward, right? I'm not satisfied yet. I'm never going to be satisfied. I'm never going to reach that level. I'm still going to try to keep pushing myself forward in Spanish. But I did wait until I got to that pretty good level in Spanish before I even started thinking about French. Okay. I kind of dabbled in Esperanto along the way, but I didn't do it to the extent that I thought it would affect my Spanish learning, because that was my priority in 2015. Benny Lewis, who's a pretty famous polyglot. Hello, Voller Silas. Thanks for joining. I'm doing well, thank you. Benny Lewis, pretty famous polyglot online in the language learning community. I read his book, and he talks about learning a language in 3 months. Okay, now, what does it actually mean to learn a language in 3 months, or to become fluent in 3 months? Is it possible? It kind of depends on your definition of fluent, and it's a semantics issue, right? But he does it constantly. He wants to, I think he wants to Brazil and learned Japanese or something over the period of 3 months. And when he does that, from what I've read, he completely abandons the study of all other languages, right? You just can't make that much progress in a language that fast if you're also dividing your time among other languages. Okay. Now, granted, most of us don't have any need to become fluent in just 3 months, right? It's a fun thing to do. It's fun to think about becoming fluent in another language, but we don't need to make progress that fast. But it does take focus. Okay. Um, and again, it depends on your priorities, right? There's a lot of people out there. I see a lot of polyglots on like Instagram, and they list native language and they put a little flag in their profile. And then under that, actively working on, and then there's like 2 or 3, they have like German, Afrikaans, and Cantonese. And then under that, you know, maintaining, and then it's like Tagalog and French and Urdu and Spanish and Portuguese, and then underneath that it's like next, and you have Greek and Latin, and there's like 9 or 15 different languages on there. And are you really actively working on all these at the same time? Maybe, I don't know. You know, if that's what you enjoy and you like being A1 in a whole bunch of different languages, then, that's what you want to do. I'm not here to judge you for that, right? The example that I always use is I like playing Halo, right? It's probably dating myself now. Does anyone still play Halo anymore? I don't know. I like playing Halo, and that's what I like to do in my free time. Why do you care if that's what I do for fun, right? So if your thing for fun, I see on Duolingo all the time, I'll go on people's profiles and I'll see that they're like level 11 in like Swedish, Norwegian, Spanish, Portuguese, Esperanto, Klingon, High Valerian, Russian, Ukrainian, Romanian, Greek. And it's like, how do you have time to get at this high of a level in all these different languages on Duolingo? Granted, if you have spent a lot of time in the past working on some of these languages, then you can probably test out of some of the earlier levels. But still, that you got to be really dedicated to Duolingo to learn all that stuff. Valersaya says, I'm trying to learn French while I'm managing my English to not forget words, phrases, expressions. Is a bit difficult and confusing. Yeah, it totally is. At least you said managing French and English. Yeah, that's strange. See, I never had to learn English as a second language, so it's hard for me to know what that would be like. But I know there's so many words that are very similar in French and English that I could see it being difficult not mixing the two. I have that problem with French and Spanish a lot because French and Spanish are very similar, right? They're both Romance languages. And I'll be in my French class and I'm trying to say a word and this word is like trying to come out, but I know I'm about to say this word because of the Spanish influence on my brain, right? Or I'll be thinking of how do you say this in Spanish, right? I'm talking to someone in Spanish and I'm like on the verge of pushing this word out of my tongue, but I know I can't say it that way because that's the French trying to come out. It's hard. It's a struggle, especially when your languages are that similar. I don't have really any experience yet learning languages that are very different from Indo-European languages. Hopefully this summer, I'm going to start for the first time learning a non-Indo-European language. And so I don't know. I can't talk about that a whole lot, but from what I've heard other people talk about, from other people's experiences, it's a lot easier to mix up languages when they're very similar, especially when they're both your second language, right? I even occasionally do it with my native language. Hello, Converse. Thanks for joining. Converse. I don't know how to say that, but thanks for joining. Then you have what they call the laddering technique. Have you guys heard of this laddering? Where so my first language was my first second language was Spanish. Okay, I learned Spanish via English. Okay, so I went to Spanish class, and the teacher was an English speaker, taught me Spanish in English, and then years later when Duolingo came out, I used the Spanish for English speakers Duolingo course, and then I started using Memrise, and they would give me flashcards with a Spanish word on one side and an English word on the other side. So everything was Spanish and English, and I learned Spanish via English. My next language was French. Okay, and so this is what they call the laddering technique. Rather than everything being French and English, I laddered it so that my base language was Spanish. And I did this to a limited extent. Not completely. I didn't submerge myself in I don't know what you would say, the laddering technique. But I did this to some extent, where when I was doing Duolingo, or when I was doing Memrise, my flashcards weren't a French word on one side and an English word on the other side. It was a French word on one side, Spanish word on the other side, because my Spanish was at quite a good level that, at least in the beginning when I'm learning the French basics, I can use that to reinforce my Spanish while also learning French. Okay, and it gets more difficult as you go along, because suddenly you're going to start encountering some things in French that you haven't actually learned really well in Spanish, or sometimes you miss a little bit of the nuance in the Spanish phrases in the translations of more complex French phrases. And I think that's a valuable technique. Channy says, what are your thoughts on using Pimsleur for 2 languages? Example, Chinese and Japanese, doing 1 lesson each a day, but also studying on the side, maybe more focused on one than the other. I personally, well, not just me, I know other people do this as well. Like, for example, I remember hearing Steve Kaufman say, learning 2 languages simultaneously doesn't work for him. Okay. And I personally, I can't really tell if it works for me or not either, because I've never actually spent a lot of time learning 2 languages at once. Okay. I've learned languages while trying to maintain other languages. Okay. That's typically what I do. But that means I'm dividing my time between actively learning French and also dedicating some smaller percentage of time to maintaining my Spanish. Okay. And after my French got to a pretty good level, I actually stopped doing even that. Like, I spent 1 semester learning just French. Okay. For basically the entire semester. And I just stopped learning Spanish or practicing. I didn't read in Spanish. I didn't listen to Spanish music. I listened to French music, and I read French books, watched French movies. Okay. And I took French classes during that semester. And then later semester, I took only Spanish classes and listened to music in Spanish and watched Spanish TV shows without practicing French very much. And that seemed to be fine, because my French had already been at a relatively substantial level. I'm not C2 in French, but I'm probably a solid B2, maybe. I don't know, B1.5, B2. So I was able to leave my study of French for a little while in order to focus, kind of knock some of the rust off my Spanish, right? Barbara says, do you have a language planner or bullet? Nope. sorry, what was I saying? Yeah, so now I'll tend to focus on one language or the other for a certain amount of time. Okay, I tried not to go too long in order that I start forgetting one language. This semester is a little bit different because I'm taking 2 Spanish classes and 1 French class. So I'm kind of having to juggle that all on my brain at the same time. And I'll tell you what, it is tough. It is tough. Um, Last semester, I took only French classes. And then immediately after the semester was over, I took a study abroad class in Mexico. So I went from speaking only French to all of a sudden being immersed in Spanish, and the French just kept coming on out. Um, but it didn't take super long. Didn't take too long for me to readjust and start getting Spanish to come out. And then, that was just about 2 weeks. And then I started this semester where I'm taking Spanish and French. They come out at weird times now, especially since I have Spanish class at 9:30 in the morning. And then my next Spanish class starts at 11 in the morning. And then my French class starts at 12:30 in the afternoon. So it's one right after the other. And I'm always walking into French class and saying, "Hola, amigos." And then, I have one other friend in that class who's also studying Spanish as well as French. And so she might speak to me in Spanish, but everyone else looks at me and they're like, "Why are you saying that in our French class?" Naranjo says, "How do you go about drilling conjugations in Spanish and French?" I don't. I have taken Spanish classes where we had to drill conjugations, and we would choose a verb, and then go about and write out every single conjugation of that verb. There's like 60 of them. Not every single one, but I would write out, choose a verb, then choose a person as well. So él or yo or nosotros, and then write out every conjugation of that verb in that person. Okay. I never really drilled verb conjugations in French. First of all, because they're mostly pronounced the same, except for a few exceptions, like at least within the tenses. So, appelle, je appelle, tu appelles, il appelle, ils appellent. They're spelt differently, but if I'm speaking to someone, I don't need to conjugate it, right? You only conjugate most verbs in French when you're writing within the tenses, at least with regard to person and number. So I just never worried about it. And I spent a long time speaking and learning French without knowing how to conjugate verbs. And this kind of starts to come to you as you go along. You pick up a little bit here and there, and then you start to kind of form a whole picture. But yeah, I didn't do a real comprehensive conjugation learning method for French. So what else is there to talk about in learning 2 languages at once? Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to know, have any of you guys actually actively learned 2 languages simultaneously, like starting one and then immediately starting another one, or starting one where you're still very new in one language and trying to build them both at the same time? I really don't have experience with that. So I'm interested to hear other people's experiences. Like I said, when I am learning 2 languages at once, it's like I'm at a pretty good level in one language, and I work on maintaining that one while starting the next one from scratch. So maybe that would actually be a good experiment. I might actually, now that I think about it, try that sometime in the distant future, um, just to see. So I'm probably going to start learning Thai this summer, and that's a language that I actually want to learn. Um, so I don't want to dilute that with other languages. I'm probably going to stop working on French, Spanish, and Esperanto for a few months uh, if I do move to Thailand, and just focus on learning as much Thai as humanly possible. But that would be a cool idea. I think now that this just came to my mind just now as I was talking to you guys. Maybe after I get to a good level on Thai, maybe I'll pick up, like, try to learn German and Korean at once. It would just be an experiment, maybe for like 3 months or something like that, just to see how it goes. And then I would have more, I don't know, credibility, or have more experience to talk about when I do live streams like this. So yeah, that's, we've talked a lot about the different aspects of learning multiple languages at once. I think I've kind of hit it from multiple angles. The key to remember is that it's just hard. Okay, learning a language takes work. It takes a lot of work. Okay, especially if you want to reach a real good level. If you're just trying to become a tourist that knows how to say, "Where's the bathroom?" and "2 beers, please," that's a different story, right? But if you're actually interested in learning the language and developing your language skills, it's a job and it's a time commitment. Okay, and there's no easy way to rush through it. So to do two of them at the same time, uh, it's not impossible. I know there are people who do it, but you just got to know what you're doing. You got to know what you're getting yourself into. Okay, don't be naive and think that you're going to go into that and that it will be easy, because it won't. I remember long time ago watching a video by, I think it was by Luca, and he was recommending that if you want to learn 10 languages, like if you want to learn 10 languages over the next 10 years, then he recommends learning 2 languages simultaneously for 2 years. So rather than learning one language for 1 year and then starting to learn another language the year after that, learn 2 languages simultaneously for 2 years, and then after that, move on to 2 more languages, which seems like an interesting approach. But I guess I could see an advantage to that over just starting a new language every year for 10 years. But like I say, everyone's different. You got to find what works for you, and you have to balance everything against your priorities, right? You have to decide what you want, and then base your goals off of that. Okay, if you want to learn a ton of languages, then don't get sidetracked by trying to focus on just one language for the whole time. Okay, if you want to learn one language really well, then don't get distracted by all these other languages that are calling your name, which is hard to do because you just want to speak them all. It's like Pokemon. I'm a rising freshman going into college, and I'm thinking about taking language classes. Are they any good for language learning? Yeah, they are. Language classes are good. Now, you have to be careful, because don't fall into the trap of believing that you're just going to learn a language by going to class and by doing the homework. You're not. It's a commitment, and you have to make that determination for yourself, right? I spent 4 years learning Spanish in high school, 1 year in middle school, 4 years in high school, and then another year in college. So 6 years, 5.5 years of language learning. And I was not a very good Spanish speaker after that, until in 2015, I decided for myself to start learning Spanish. And that's when everything changed, right? You have to do it at home. You have to do it during your free time. You have to do it. You have to study while you're driving. You have to study while you're on the bus. You have to study while you're in the shower. You have to study while you're cooking. And that's not always active study, but listening to music, listening to podcasts, doing Pimsleur, repeating things, trying to build that muscle memory in your mouth. So language classes are beneficial tools, in my opinion, but they're not the whole story. You're not going to learn a language just by taking a class, in my opinion. Some people can. There are exceptions out there, but I think those are few and far between. One thing I would recommend is definitely taking linguistics classes if you can, if they offer a linguistics 101 class at your college, just to learn some of the basics about what human languages are able to do and just how they work. That goes a long way in helping you develop languages or develop your skills in specific languages. So I think I'm going to cut off this stream here now. We've talked about multiple aspects of learning languages, multiple languages at once. So thank you everybody for watching the stream, and I'll see you guys on Friday.